We sit down with Greg Baise, the president and CEO of the Illinois Manufacturers Association, and ask him about his impressions of Governor Rauner so far, issues affecting Illinois' business community, and facilitating trade with foreign nations as a means to expand Illinois' economy. This runs about 30 minutes.
Greg Baise, thanks for joining us again on the Illinois Channel.
Glad to be here.
As we tape this, Governor Rauner has just finished his first quarter as governor, marking the first 100 days. He's laid out some of the elements of his agenda going forward. What overall your impressions thus far?
Well, I don't think anyone should be surprised at what we've seen, what we've heard. The governor campaigned on this, talked about many of the issues, controversial issues during the election cycle. So his plan and what he's talked about in this first 100 days should not surprise anyone. Representative of the business community, we're pleased at his attempt to get the budget of the state in balance, bring the spending in line with what the revenues are. It's still a very difficult job to do with the sort of the whole of revenues based on what the spending pattern has been. But we'll see what happens here in the next 30 days of trying to bring that balance together there. The governor's quote message of shaking up Springfield and talking about how we need to do things differently, I think is a positive one. The previous administration and Quinn and Blagojevich both, the executive was not a strong participant in the discussions. The legislature and legislative leaders seem to take the lead in being able to do that. Our system's really not set up to do that. We need a strong executive. An executive puts forth a plan, whether you agree with it or not, let the legislature deal with it and come to some solutions. And I think that was part of our hindrance in the last decade, that the executive was not strong enough to stand up to the legislative branch and say, no, we cannot pass these phony budgets. No, we cannot continue to let this problem, the festering sore of our pension debt, grow. And that's what Governor Rauner is talking about here and trying to bring some change there. The governor's move on and discussion about the strength of organized labor, especially in the public employee union side, is a welcome discussion. In the last 20 years, you've seen the growth and power of the public employee unions, especially in this state, a real shift, frankly, from the strength of private sector unions to public sector unions. And the governor has some very strong feelings about that and how we should be going, and that's part of the discussion and is an overarching issue, really, in a lot of these discussions.
I know I just had an opportunity to talk with some business leaders in the Chicagoland area, and every time one does that privately, you get some insights in what people really think, maybe things they wouldn't say in front of a camera. What do you hear when you talk to members just about the business climate in Illinois, and what kind of changes are they looking for?
Well, clearly the election of Governor Rauner was a very positive sign as far as my members were concerned. Many were just fed up with the idea of the spending out of balance, the inability to come to grips with the pension problem, a lack of understanding of what it takes to be competitive in the world economy today. The election, I think many of them felt, well, this is a ray of hope. We'll see what he can do. They're encouraged by the fact that he's come to Springfield with this kind of mentality, and they're very supportive of it. Now the real question is, how much can he deliver on changing that direction? And I think that's what my members are asking themselves. Can he really get this done? And it may not all get accomplished or what he wants accomplished in this first legislative session, but it's going to set a tone and a path of where we're going. Clearly the pension issue is something that's still out there. The courts got to rule on the recent pension bill that was passed, but that's not even enough there to solve this problem. There's going to have to be some other things done. The city of Chicago's got problems with their pension issue. The police and fire side of all of this is a big problem. So the pension issue is not going to go away. But leaders in the business community at least believe that we have in Governor Rauner someone who is attacking that problem and not just going to kick the can down the road.
Of the top priorities, one of them, it seems to me, from the business community standpoint, is a change in the workers' comp law.
Right.
Because here in Illinois, causation, one doesn't have to be hurt on the job to get workers' comp, and consequently the premiums are higher in
Well,
Illinois.
be technically true about that the full amount of the injury, someone just can't claim workers' comp just because they may have been injured at home, but pre-existing conditions, kinds of things like that, are really not taken into consideration in Illinois where they are in other states. So that is a top priority in that regard.
How much of a financial burden, just for those who don't run a business and aren't aware and don't follow this? I mean, how big of an issue is that? And if someone looks to have a factory and they're looking at the difference between, say, Illinois or Indiana, how much of a factor is the workers' comp?
Well, Indiana, it's unfortunately, not to demean our good friends in Indiana, that they're the state we're most often compared to. They're at the bottom of the list in workers' compensation, meaning that when someone loses a finger, as an example, in Indiana, the value of that finger is significantly less than it is in Illinois. And that's part of the indemnity issue about when you are injured. For people who don't understand the way workers' comp is about, people have insurance policies, small businesses have insurance policies, and they pay a premium to cover workers' compensation. Large companies are self-insured, a pool of money set aside to be able to take care of those. Large companies and small companies will make a comparison of their businesses that they may have in Tennessee or in other states in the South and the West, and be significantly higher costs for them on their premium that they pay insurance on, or if they're self-insured. Caterpillar will tell you, as an example, the same injury in the same facility, like facility somewhere else in the country versus one of their facilities here in Illinois. Illinois, significantly higher. The things that go into that are several. First, just the systemic cost of being able to take care of a workers' comp claim, injury, a legitimate injury on the workforce. Someone is hurt by a piece of machinery and things of that nature. To go through the entire process to get that injured worker, one, rehabilitated, medical issues taken care of, and back on the job, and for the payment of the medical payments that are necessary are going to be, one, it takes longer. We have a lot of frictional cost in being able to settle that. Two, medical costs are going to be significantly higher in Illinois. We have a medical fee schedule, as an example, that says that you can pay X amount for this particular injury. We're the third highest in the country. And then finally, that, as I described earlier, that cost of being able to take care of what part of your body, or a permanent partial disability, or even a total disability, Illinois is going to be significantly higher in what it pays than many of our Midwestern states. You mentioned Indiana. They're at 50, they're at the bottom. Where we really need to be, because I think businesses, one, want to make sure that they take care of their worker if there's a legitimate injury. Two, they want to make sure that medical community or rehabilitative services are not gouging the price and making it higher. And three, let's make sure we can get that worker back on the job so that they're being able to contribute, take care of their family, and be an active participant in that particular business.
Is the workers' comp issue high enough on the priority of manufacturers that they will not expand, or is it really an inhibition against them expanding their force here?
It is. You hear that all the time. There was just an article in the Chicago press about a shelf manufacturer in the southern suburbs, moving just literally across the border to Indiana, and the significant savings that they were going to see solely on the workers' comp side. Their employees were just going to have to drive a little bit different direction when you have that kind of border that's that close, and they will be able to save significant dollars. And when people say, our business is just looking, well, they're greedy, they want to have a better bottom line. No, the reality of it is that shelf manufacturer is competing against shelving that may be being made in Korea. It's being shipped into the United States. They have to price it to be able to get it sold in retail outlets accordingly. Those are the kinds of things that small businesses have to take into account and consideration all the time. And yes, it is an inhibition to see expansion. And when the opportunity and that business was expanding. They said they could have done a warehouse in the western suburbs or whatever, but that work comp cost was a problem.
As we tape this, the Commerce Department said today that the economy in the first quarter grew at only 0.2%.
Right.
The expectation was going to be about 1%. So again, on a national basis, we have a sluggish economy. aside from all that Illinois is dealing with in its own political woes, we've been swimming upstream, it seems like, for the better part of a decade.
Well, it hasn't changed a lot in that decade.
Well, and that's what I was going to say. How do you assess, one, the business climate as far as how business is doing? We hear, or have heard some stories, that people are moving manufacturing back to Illinois, away from places like China. Is that your understanding, or?
Well, what you have really going on is a transition in the American economy in general. And transportation costs, you make the comment about moving manufacturing from the Far East back to the United States in general, or to states like Illinois. That truly is going on, the cost of doing business. Other problems in the Far East, Southeast Asia, and other places causing some concern. I think in a lot of ways we need to orient ourselves in many ways more north-south than we are looking east-west. That the economies of Mexico, Central and Southern South America are important to a state like Illinois because of our exporting abilities, both in agriculture and manufacturing. A week or so ago, Granite City U.S. Steel facility was announced that it was shutting down its facility for a time being. Steel companies like that are somewhat the canaries in the coal mine, because steel and what they're producing is what's going into refrigerators or washing machines that's being used in the housing industry, going into the auto industry, so not as many cars. So their forecast were showing us that there's this slowdown that's occurring, and we've been hearing that a little bit. Although I must say, in our last board meeting of the IMA, which has quite a variety of different companies around the table, everybody was still doing pretty well. But we also, that pretty well means it's off lows from 08, 09, and 10 that they've crept back up. But you would find most people would tell you, well, we've never quite made it back to those 06 or 07 levels that you saw at that time. So Illinois is very reflective of the national economy. Our economy is very diverse. The agriculture, the service industry, the financial markets, and manufacturing. So what's happening nationwide is going to be happening here.
You know, one of the issues, and it's kind of ironic, because we think that we have not enough jobs, too much unemployment, and yet one of the issues I hear in talking with people is that they worry about that there's not enough young people going into the pipeline to replace baby boomers who are going to be leaving the jobs and retiring, and that would be true in just any number of fields from what I've heard from people. Are you hearing this, and how big of a problem is that?
Very true. One of our major initiatives here at the association through our Education Foundation is the promotion of skills certification, high schools and community colleges being able to provide the kind of classroom work that will prepare young people to be able to walk into a manufacturing facility and get a job. Your comment about the demographics changing, absolutely the case. Over the next, each year in Illinois, we are losing about 35,000 manufacturer jobs, not jobs, we're losing people in those jobs to retirement. Some estimates of our ability to replace those with skilled employees to do that is not even half that many people ready to replace those jobs as they retire. Speaking with steel executives at a Northwest side steel company in Chicago that have tool and die workers that work for them, 55, 60 years old, had been trained years ago to do this work. Not able to find the employees to be able to replace those jobs, and the concern, will they be able to keep that facility open and find trained workers to fill those jobs? So it's incumbent upon government / education / manufacturing community and business community. How do we change the focus of the education activities to be able to prepare young people for that, for those jobs that are available?
Taxation, right now, of course, the income tax went off. I wonder how much does that even matter to the employers, since the employees are going to be paying the tax on their income? And to what extent is there any grand bargain, would you say, available to the governor to say, give me workers' comp reform, and Mike Madigan and John Kellerton, I'll agree to going back to a 5%. And to what extent, wrapped into that answer, is it a problem for the business climate if the state is looking at a $6 billion hole in its budget?
I think manufacturers, business people in general are willing to look at a budgetary solution, revenue question, to be able to help solve the funding needs of education, social services, and the essential needs of government, infrastructure as an example. I don't think it's quite that simple to say that business, it's not that big a deal. I mean, you have $1.3 billion on average of corporate income taxes paid. You have many businesses, many of my members are LLCs, so the personal income tax level does have an impact on that regard. So I'd say it is important, but they are looking for stability. They're looking for an ability to plan, and if it's going to be a percent or 1.5% more in income tax, both on a corporate and or the personal side, that can be built into the cost of doing business and understanding that. The concern, I think, that's there is that my members feel that one of these days, the big payday or the big solution needed to solve this problem is coming, and the business community may be the one to ask to shoulder more of that burden than they should. They want to see stability, they want to see a good plan, and they want to see it executed. And that's what I'm hopeful in Governor Rauner's ability to get that done.
You know, this is a little bit off the beaten path, but I don't want to talk about just things we've talked about in other places all the time. It seems to me one of the trends that concerns me, and I don't know to what extent it's a legitimate concern, but we are moving as a society towards more and more use of technology to fill job positions. So robotics, there's a book that just came out on this about the expansion of robotics. We see ATMs replacing bank tellers, etc. Is this a good thing, a bad thing, or is it not even on your radar screen?
You know, the IMA's been around since 1893, and if we were sitting here 100 years ago having this conversation, obviously the technology that we have here, the ability to build that camera, the ability to transmit this wouldn't even have been on our thought. It's the march of time, it's the march of progress that I think that we're seeing. Yes, you're going to see a dramatic shift in the workplace, and it continues to go on. When I tour a facility of one of our members across this state, the number of machines that are running, the few number of people that are running those machines, and also a different person than you normally would expected to have seen 20 years ago. They more than likely may well be Hispanic or of other nationalities than the traditional European folks that we would have seen. There's a tremendous change going on, and I think that it's one that should be accepted. Our ability, manufacturers, business in general, whether services, financial services, or whatever, to respond and utilize the technologies available, I think helps progress society forward, and I think that's what we're seeing.
You know, I should have asked when we were talking about taxation before, one of the proposals, and even Governor Rauner has discussed this as far as right now we tax like it's the 1950s, and so we tax widget makers, we tax manufacturers. There's all kinds of economic activity. One would, I think, say safely the vast majority are service economy, and yet so many of those we don't tax. Should we, in your estimation, would that be a good thing for the business climate to expand, maybe not raise the rate of taxation, but expand the base by starting to tax services?
We have a very high service, or we have a high sales tax in Illinois. In fact, in certain places in Chicago, 11% or so. So the idea of being able to expand that base, we tax about 17 services out of possible 100 or so that's there. Many states have a wide range of services that they tax. Do I think that it makes sense to do that? Absolutely. You go to pick up your shirts this morning that have been dry cleaned, there's no service tax on that. You walk next door to buy dog food for your dog, you're going to be taxed on that particular activity. You go into a store, the whole hodgepodge of service taxes or the sales tax in food and beverage and other kinds of things that we tax. If you buy medicated shampoo, it's not taxed. You buy regular shampoo, it is taxed. The state and the government ought to take a real look at this, try to broaden it out, make some sense of it. I think people understand that that is the case. It's there. We already tax, I think, the most important service of all, electricity. So this idea that we shouldn't be doing these, I think, is a phony argument by those who I don't think understand or appreciate, of which we do at the IMA, the needed services that government provides and needs to be supported at an appropriate level.
Speaking of electricity, there is a move with Exelon, and they're trying to have their electric power included in the basket of, I guess you would say, non-fossil fuel, and to take advantage. Do you have a position as an association on that?
We do not. Exelon has been a good partner with the association over the years. We've worked with them. The IMA was part of pushing the whole deregulation of the electrical industry in Illinois back in the late 90s. Illinois is one of its great resources is our availability of power. Our friends in Wisconsin and other places around the country don't have that. The debate about the need to be able to help a company like Exelon support its nuclear power facilities is really a broad-ranging question, both from a policy standpoint by the country and being able to protect this portion of our power generation, to making sure that we're not subsidizing just the rate or the shareholders of that particular company because the rate of return isn't as great as it should be on those facilities. There's a balance there. Again, it's why it's in the legislative process to be discussed. I think one should not lose sight, however, of the important advantage that and just by the fact Exelon owns them, that the nuclear facilities that we have in this state are tremendous assets. Once they're shut down, they're gone, most likely never to be rebuilt. So before that occurs, this examination, this question needs to be closely looked at. My members pay a big share of the cost of electricity, and it's, on the most part, its highest cost of doing business. So we're deeply interested in this question. We've not taken a position yay or nay on this one, but we're actively involved in the discussions on that.
That's interesting what you just said. I mean, that electricity is often the highest cost of their doing business.
Absolutely, power. So the idea that, back to the question of service taxes, you have a 5% service tax on electricity used, and in many home rural units of government, i.e. City of Chicago, Naperville, places like that, they also impose. So you have a 10% tax on insurance or on electricity right off the top, or your natural gas. So that's a big cost to a manufacturer.
You know, one thing that I've learned over the years, and sometimes I get to, just by virtue of my job, hear very interesting things that most people don't know of. And one of the interesting ones was that Illinois' #1 trading partner is Alberta, Canada, that we do more trade with Alberta, Canada than with any state in the nation. And that was in preparation for interviewing the Canadian ambassador to the United States. Something like 200,000 jobs in Illinois directly tied to trade with Canada. To what extent is the Manufacturers Association looking at expanding the economy of Illinois by facilitating trade, or is there something the state should be doing to educate manufacturers of how they could sell more widgets overseas? Is this an issue worth looking at more?
Not directly to our trade association, but to the state, absolutely it is. And as I mentioned earlier in our discussion, the orientation of looking north and south instead of to Asia or to Europe is really where the future, I believe, happens to be. And your mention of Alberta is exactly right. It is really the economic hub. It's the Midwest, or Canada's equivalent of the Midwest, of industrial and agricultural heartland. I think that number of 200,000 is doubled when you talk about Mexico as our largest trading partner in what goes back and forth between those two countries. And many of our members look for and are looking at opportunities in Mexico or in Central America, and then take it further to the economies of South America and what's involved there. I think in, whether it's our lifetime or not, that orientation of the trade, of what we're doing as a nation is going to shift that way. So where we're more concerned about policies that are going on there than maybe the policies that are going on in the Mideast or in Europe at the time.
Before we close out, you will soon have your annual meeting with your members coming, and you'll hear from, I believe, the governor and President John Cullerton.
Right.
We had discussed at the top about we've had a poor climate. I think almost everyone would agree, political climate for the last decade or so, going back to 2003 when Rod Blagojevich came into office. How would you assess not just the change in governorships, but there's been changes obviously in the General Assembly and the leadership along the way in places. where are we today politically as a environment, and what does that portend going future as compared to what we've been through in the last decade?
I think the next 30 days could be very important. It's going to put us on a trajectory. I hope and urge our leadership in the General Assembly and in the executive branch to attempt to come together. Don't be willing or unwilling to compromise, to maybe move the ball forward. I think in history, in the recent history with Governor Thompson, Edgar, George Ryan, that the ability for them to come to agreements with Mike Madigan, the leadership on the Democratic side in the Senate, has been a good thing for our state to be able to solve problems. We're a very diverse state. The viewpoints of a legislator on the near west side of the city of Chicago are greatly different than a legislator from southeast Illinois. Those kind of differences help make us a great state, but it also makes sometimes the ability to understand what the other needs and kinds of problems that they face. So let's hope that we do see that kind of compromise over the next 30 days. And if that occurs, then I think we're on a trajectory for the next 4 years at least, or at least 3 before the next election cycle picks up, of seeing how this is all going to go. The next election cycle will be very important. It's almost amazing to think. Next gubernatorial election will be there for a remap situation. And so the whole political structure and how things might change will be at stake in the next election cycle. So let's use this time wisely. The long tail of problems that this state faces that goes back, you know, and I'm not going to say it all rests on Rod Blagojevich's shoulders. There were things that were there. But the long tail of what occurred in that decade is going to be with us a long time. We didn't get into that problem immediately. We won't get out of it immediately. Let's take the incremental steps to solve those problems as Republicans and Democrats in this state.
And lastly, in the past, you ran as a Republican candidate. Some people will think generically all businesses and business associations are Republican organizations. We have a Republican governor, I would say. We have a Democratic legislator. Just to educate the public, as an association, some of what you do, I would think, is just education for your members about a host of issues, maybe not political. But on the political side, when you talk, and of necessity, you're going to be talking to Democratic leaders as well as now a Republican governor. How do you balance as an association, as a leader of an association? What is your role? And you know, I often find that the people who are the most partisan are the man on the street who never deal with them. You know, they think you're extremely partisan, or they think generically, not you as an individual. But what's the reality of you as a leader of a business association and how you deal in that political environment of Springfield?
Well, our name is not the Illinois Republican Manufacturers Association. It's the Illinois Manufacturers Association. And our job is to try to find a majority of legislators and a governor to support activities that advance what we think are the important issues of the day. As I mentioned earlier, we've been around since 1893. A host of issues that have changed over time have confronted the association. I have a good board, a business leadership board. In fact, actually, when you talk about Republicans, I had actually a close friend of Pat Quinn's and a Democrat, partisan Democrat, as a chairman just one cycle ago. So we're not always just that political side, but we look for a manufacturing majority. And I think good trade associations and their representatives, one, are honest brokers of information. The legislator needs to know what your position is, give them the facts, give it straight. Never tell them something that's not true. Secondly, be an ardent and passionate advocate for what you are about. And 3, make sure that you inform your members of what legislators and governors are really doing and how they're doing it and why. You could go back and read a lot of our articles when Quinn and or Blagojevich as governors, where we weren't attacking them on a partisan basis, but attacking the basis of the issues that they might have been advocating at the time. And so that's what a good representative of the, quote, special interest, and you know, we're one of those in this town, tries to do. And I think when you look at business associations, the good ones always are telling you the truth, always advocating strongly, and always making sure that their members are aware of what elected officials are doing.
All right, well, Greg Baise, we appreciate you taking the time to speak with us.
Great, always a pleasure.
Thanks. You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.